Flowey is Not a Good Life Coach by Unrested Jade. Chapter 19. Even now the evil seed of what you've done, etc., etc. Of the two brothers, Papyrus was as healthy as Sans was not. He almost never got sick, and when he was injured he healed quickly and easily even without magic. It was rare that anything came up that he couldn't manage on his own. He couldn't manage this. His first ever hangover was apparently making up for lost time, with his back injury acting as its eager accomplice, keeping him too nauseated to eat, and in too much pain to focus on anything other than holding himself in whatever position hurt the least. Wasn't it supposed to get better as the day went on? He felt worse. How did Sans put up with it? Papyrus supposed his brother was simply more accustomed to being ill. He made it look effortless. Effortless. Sans would have found that funny on several different levels. Through clenched teeth, Papyrus half laughed, half sobbed. Naturally, the one time he had a joke, well, it probably wasn't that funny anyway. The minute sound of his own laughter dragged through his head like a ripsaw. Something had to be done. He had work to finish. If nothing else, he at least needed a bit more rest before nightfall. Sans kept all sorts of medicines in his room, but borrowing any of it felt inappropriate. Besides, knowing his luck, Papyrus would take the wrong pill and make himself really sick. He'd have to go out and buy something for himself. Snowdon was a small town. Nevertheless, the walk to the general store was entirely too long. All the way at the western edge of town, it was the last building before the bridge leading into the forest. Normally, Papyrus would run there, but just maintaining a slow walking pace was difficult enough. Each step sent a bolt of pain up his spine to ricochet inside of his skull. He paused at the T intersection near the library with the realization he would have to pass the inn in order to reach the store next door. The thought nearly sent him back home. Shaking his head at how ridiculous he was acting, he forced himself to keep moving. A small eternity later, when he'd finally made it all the way down the road to his destination, Papyrus faltered for a moment in front of the inn. Crossing his arms, he gazed up at the second-floor windows, wondering whether Sans had a room that looked out on the road or one that faced back into the trees. Not that his brother was the type to stare forlornly out of windows. Even if he were, Papyrus would be the last person he'd want to see hanging around outside. With a small shake of his head, Papyrus continued on into the store. The general store always smelled of cinnamon, and it was always kept toasty warm. Along with the soft lighting, it made for a cozy, calming atmosphere. So cozy, in fact, that the shopkeeper was napping at the sales counter, her head pillowed on her arms. The bell over the door made her stir, ears flicking, but it wasn't enough to wake her. "Excuse me, miss?" Papyrus said, his own voice unbearably loud in his own head. When that didn't work, he reached out to gently tap her on the shoulder. Bleary-eyed and whiskers twitching, the woman raised her head. She jumped on seeing Papyrus in front of her. "Oh, hiya!" she said, ears pricking up straight. She had a forceful speaking voice. Today she might as well have been shouting through a megaphone. Ow! Papyrus rubbed his temple, coaxing the bones of his skull to stay together. "Sorry to startle you, miss." The shopkeeper laughed, waving him off. "Miss, well, bless your heart." She took a moment to smooth the fur on her cheek. "I do apologize," she said. "It's been a slow day. What can I get for you, sweetie?" "Just a pain reliever, if you have it." "Sure do. Only 30 gold. While the shopkeeper skimmed over the shelves behind her, Papyrus set a few battered gold coins on the counter. "I thought you looked a little peaky. You sick?" Papyrus made a vague, affirmative sound, thankful that the lighting was dim enough to mask a lot of the scuffs on his face. After a brief search, the shopkeeper turned back to him and pressed a small bottle of pills into his hands. "And remember," the shopkeeper said, writing out a receipt, "it works best if you drink a full glass of water with it." She smiled. "You probably already know that, but then you buy medicine so rarely." "Thank you for the reminder." Papyrus pocketed the receipt and did his best to smile back despite his splitting headache. The shopkeeper scooped the coins into her lockbox. "Poor thing," she said, looking at him with motherly pity. "I guess even you must catch colds sometimes." "I guess so," Papyrus said. No need to correct her. "Well, try your best to rest up." Nodding, Papyrus turned to leave. A cough from the shopkeeper made him pause. "It's not my business, of course," she said, ears drooping. "But my sister was awfully concerned to see your brother at the inn this morning. He is your brother, right?" She fidgeted with the clutter on the sales counter. "He seemed real upset, and she found it odd that he was checking in, considering you two live right in town and all." She frowned. "Not to pry, but is everything all right? It's just that my sister worries about folks, you know, as if all her kids ain't enough. She's everybody's mama. Everything was not all right. Everything was about as far as possible from all right. "Yes," he said, more unsure and thready than he was aiming for. "We had a disagreement, that's all." "Oh," the shopkeeper said, perking up. "Say no more. My sister and I butt heads all the time, but it always blows over. Family's family." She smiled reassuringly. "Once he's cooled off, I'm sure you two will patch things right up." Papyrus knew better, but he didn't need anyone else's concern. "Thank you," he said, forcing a grin through every kind of pain. "I'm sure you're right." It was late afternoon when Sans finally returned home. Papyrus heard the front door, but stayed at his desk. He listened as his brother shuffled upstairs and seemed to pause for a moment outside his bedroom. Papyrus kept still and quiet. The moment passed, and Sans moved on to his own room, shutting the door behind him. Throughout the evening, the pair avoided each other, staying holed up in their respective bedrooms. However, as the night drew in and Papyrus readied himself for another practice, Sans showed himself. "I kind of figured." Sans leaned against the railing, watching Papyrus put his boots on. "Not gonna waste my time trying to stop you," he said, "and I won't follow you." "Thank you," Papyrus said, looking up at his brother. "I appreciate that. Truly." He hadn't expected Sans to give up so easily, despite everything that had transpired this morning. Was Sans retreating from this one specific battle, or was he withdrawing entirely? And either way, should Papyrus feel relieved or worried? He didn't know. "Don't sneak out like that again." Sans' face was impossible to read, closed off and flat. "If you insist on doing this, you can be an adult about it and let me know where you're going and when you'll be back." And looked Sans in the eye as he did so, presumably until his nerve failed or his guilt caught up with him and he relented and stayed home. Papyrus frowned. The tactic wouldn't work, and it would only upset Sans more to have Papyrus breeze past him every night. How was he supposed to keep Sans safe from his own soul-draining melancholy and Flowey at the same time? "There's a clearing 3 miles to the southwest," Papyrus said. "The teenagers haven't found it yet. I'll be back no later than 6. Roughly half of that statement had been true. More than half, if he counted the west minus the south. Sans gave him a long, long look. Papyrus calmly held his gaze until, grudgingly, Sans nodded his acceptance. Letting himself out into the night, Papyrus relaxed, scowling openly in self-disgust. He had to stay strong. There was no other way. Better that Sans was unhappy, so long as he was kept safe. It bothered him. How easy it had become to take his cruelty toward his brother in stride. As much as Papyrus hated to admit it, the nightly practices were helping. Flowey was a pitiless teacher, and being subjected to his attentions without time to recover was taking a toll on Papyrus physically, especially since Flowey now only healed him on an as-needed basis. Magically, though, Papyrus was slowly regaining control. It was strange. If anything, he was twitchier than ever, but the magic that now roiled below the surface was easier to hold down. Having an outlet for his energy was probably part of the explanation, but it was more than that. The constant use of his attacks without mishap was rebuilding his confidence, bit by bit. And just as he'd become adept at spotting the slightest change in Flowey's moods, He was learning to recognize when his own emotional state was beginning to shift, giving him a chance to subdue his anxiety before it got the best of him. The familiar feeling of self-mastery was coming back at last. Papyrus had missed it so much. His relief at seeing some progress buoyed him through the long nights. Flowey pushed him harder than ever, and Papyrus threw his whole self into each challenge. As long as he kept improving, nothing was beyond his endurance. Even Flowey's tantrums held less horror now, and the off-putting conversations at the end of each night were more bearable. To be in control of his magic again was worth anything Flowey threw at him. As they went on, that dizzy, stuttering feeling came back, sometimes more than once in a night. Papyrus would catch a glancing blow or dodge out of the way an especially devastating attack, the world twisting and stuttering around him for just an instant. He shrugged it off. It wasn't important. On the 10th night, Papyrus made a breakthrough. "Sans!" Papyrus pounded on his brother's bedroom door. "Sans, I can do it now! Get up!" He'd run the whole way back to the house. He was tired and sore and elated. Flowey was pleased with him, so much so that he'd given him the next few nights off as a reward. That on its own was nearly as exciting as what he'd just achieved. The sounds of shuffling and confused muttering filtered through the door. "Papyrus?" There was a creak of worn bed springs. "It's 4 a.m. "You might as well get up then," Papyrus said, fighting to keep still. His face ached from grinning. "Come and see what I can do! I can do it on purpose now!" The door swung open, and Sans squinted in the brighter light of the loft. "Do what on purpose?" Sleep roughened his voice. He leaned against the doorframe as though he might doze off again, standing up. Papyrus fought the urge to shake his brother into wakefulness. "Take a guess!" He smiled brightly. "Wait," he said, eyes widening. "You mean you can—" "Yes, yes!" Papyrus said, too excited to let him finish. Grabbing Sans' hand, Papyrus pulled him towards the stairs. "Come see!" Sans stumbled along in Papyrus's wake for a few steps, then dug his heels in. Papyrus stopped when he felt resistance, narrowly avoiding dragging Sans off his feet. He looked back at his brother. "What's the matter?" he asked, giddiness tainted with a now familiar unease. They hadn't been getting along well since Sans' all-nighter. Things had been chilly. Their home was now no man's land. Papyrus spent most of his time struggling through the reports alone until he was forced to lie down until the headache eased. Sans seemed to not do much of anything in particular. He didn't go to work, and Papyrus wondered if he even still had a job to go to. He didn't dare ask. Papyrus had apologized numerous times, but with nothing backing up his words, they were merely words. For the most part, they gave each other a wide berth, speaking little when their paths did cross. More correctly, Papyrus spoke a little, and Sans responded with stony silence. In his excitement, Papyrus had forgotten, slipping back into the habit of seeking encouragement and validation from the most reliable source he knew. He readied himself for Sans to pull his hand free, to disappear back into his room. He deserved as much. "You sure you don't want to rest first?" Papyrus blinked in surprise. For the first time in a week, Sans was looking at him without a trace of guardedness or disappointment in his expression, just concern. "You're looking pretty rough, bro." "Not important," Papyrus said, his soul lighter than it had been in what felt like forever. He tugged Sans' hand insistently. With a doubting sigh, Sans started moving. The ever-present fog swallowed them up as Papyrus led them down the road east of town. In one sense, it felt as though no time had passed since Sans had led him to this very spot. In another, it might as well have been years ago. Directing Sans to stand next to him, just in case, Papyrus took a moment to calm the figurative butterflies in his figurative stomach. He'd made a huge leap tonight, but he still needed more practice with this attack. Slow. Steady. He was in control. Raising his hand, Papyrus let his magic curl around his fingers, pulling it together into his palm. He gripped it loosely, a focus point and a catalyst for what followed. He was tired from the night's training session, but he turned his attention inward and gathered his will. He'd done it successfully 6 times now, and each time it had taken more energy, more concentration. This time, for some reason, it almost felt easy, natural. Silently and soul deep, Papyrus called out, not in rage or fear, but for the first time, in calm invitation. His magic drifted outward, floating on a tide that felt gentle as a sigh now that he'd stopped trying to fight against it. He was momentarily aware of his brother's soul at his side, a bright spark at the back of his consciousness. As the blaster took form above him, Papyrus centered his thoughts on that brightness, wordless commands of defend, safeguard, protect, running through his mind like an incantation. Who knew how much the blaster could be directed this way, if it even could, but the action alone made him feel better, steadier. "Oh," Sans said, as the attack settled into existence. "Hi, Lucy." He didn't so much as flinch, but his voice wavered. "I told you, I'm not calling it that." Papyrus fought down a smile. Sans could call the blaster whatever he wished, if it meant they were on speaking terms again. The blaster hung in the air, thrumming with potential, a taut string waiting to be plucked. The kernel of raw magic inside it twinkled through the sightless eye sockets, making it appear alert and alive. "So this is what you've been doing at night?" Sans peered up at the too-real skull, not shocked and fearful as he'd been that first night on the hilltop, but far from enthusiastic. Papyrus nodded. "Mostly," he said. That much was true. Flowey had become obsessed with the blaster at first sight, and made it clear that neither of them would rest until Papyrus mastered it. Sans played with the zipper toggle on his jacket, clicking it up and down along the teeth. "You figured it out pretty fast," he said. "Guess you didn't even need my help." "That's not true," Papyrus said. "I can summon it and keep it from firing until I want it to, but that's about the extent of it." From this angle, he could see up through the lower jaw to the raw magic inside the blaster, the same blue as the light he held loosely in his hand. "And I just got the handle on that a few hours ago." If anything, the progress Papyrus had made gave him a better appreciation of Sans' control of his own blaster. He could do more while stumbling drunk and half asleep than Papyrus could do sober and with his undivided attention. It was enviable, given that Papyrus was still making up lost ground with his magic. Sans shrugged. "That's the most important thing," he said. "Can you make it move at all?" "A little." To illustrate, Papyrus directed the skull to pivot in place, a gentle head-shaking motion. "Just enough to aim it." He focused on a treetop some 40 yards away, framing it with his thumbs and forefingers. Above him, his blaster arranged itself to line up with the target, its jaws scraping softly. Sans grunted in acknowledgement. Good." Papyrus looked down at his brother. This was the most they had said to each other, the longest they had even been in one another's presence, in a week. Are you still angry with me?" It was a stupid question. If the grimace pulling at his mouth was any indication, Sans agreed with him. "What do you think?" Another useless apology caught behind Papyrus's teeth. He swallowed it back down. "How many times have you summoned that thing tonight?" Sans asked, after a long, icy silence. The blaster was almost a comfort, something else for Papyrus to pin his attention on. "This makes 7, he said. The previous 6 times he'd fired it. It was a wonder he could still muster up any attacks at all. He could sleep for 100 years after this. Sans crossed his arms, frowning. "You should probably scatter it then," he said, "if you're going to bring this up again. You're already getting distracted." "Oh," Papyrus said, wilting. What Sans was saying was perfectly sensible, of course. The blaster was dangerous. He looked up at it, a lump rising in his throat. With a flick of a wrist, he tore it up. Spent magic drifted down like snow. Sans started walking back to the house. "I was hoping," Papyrus blurted out, watching with his soul in his mouth as Sans paused. "I was hoping—" Hope was already fading as Sans turned to face him again. "What?" Sans jammed his hands in his pockets. You don't have to worry about Lucy popping up when you don't want it to. Good job." He shrugged, as though he couldn't possibly have anything more to say. Papyrus's jaw worked uselessly for a moment. "I was hoping," he started again, feeling stuck, "that maybe you could, the idea seems so stupid now. That you could help me, like you offered earlier." As if Sans would still want to help him with anything. Stupid. Instead of getting angry or even laughing at him like Papyrus half expected, Sans just stared at him. "And what happens if I do that?" he said. That wasn't any of the responses Papyrus had braced for. "What?" He wrung his hands. What do you mean?" "If I agree to work with you on the whole blaster deal," Sans said, idly scuffing at the snow, "what happens? We just go back to the act? Pretend everything's A-OK?" He searched Papyrus's face for something Papyrus knew he wouldn't find. Papyrus stared back at him for as long as he could. Stupid! Why had he thought? He sighed and wrapped his arms around his chest. He flinched when Sans spoke again. "Hey, you know that thing where I help pull you to your feet, but you're just standing up on your own? You know, because I'm not actually strong enough?" Papyrus looked up. "Yes? When did we start doing that?" Sans asked. He had that peculiar tightness at the corners of his mouth now. "Was that one of my jokes, or was it something you came up with? Which one of us was playing along?" Papyrus found he couldn't recall when or how that little ritual had started. It was just something they did now and again. They had done it since they were kids. He shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe we both did." "Heh," Sans chuckled. "Yeah, maybe we did." The stiff smile flattened out and drooped. "Papyrus," he said, "have we just been humoring each other all this time?" "What? I don't know what you—" Papyrus shook his head again, swallowing the lump in his throat and dread weighing on his limbs. "What do you mean?" What did he mean? Sans dropped his gaze to his feet. A strong breeze would blow him away like a handful of dry pine needles. Papyrus didn't take a step closer, as much as he wished to close the distance between them. How could he try to offer comfort when he was the reason Sans looked that way? He had no right. "I mean, it's whatever. Yeah, I'd love to help," he said, twitching air quotes with his fingers. "I get to feel like I'm doing something as long as I don't ask the wrong questions, right? Let's throw poor old Sans a bone." He laughed, a short huff of cold air. "Heh, get it?" No, that wasn't it at all. Not completely, anyway. Papyrus said, hands clenched. "I just miss you, that's all." Pressing one hand to his eye sockets, Sans sighed, tense and shallow. "God help me," he said. A tear escaped from under his hand, tracing the contour of his cheekbone. "I can't keep going on like this. I can't do it. Just—" He lowered his hand, giving Papyrus a bleak grin. "Stop fucking with me, will ya?" This time, when Sans turned to go, Papyrus didn't try to stop him. He wanted to. He wanted to give his brother a hug. He wanted to ask to be read to. He wanted to promise to stay home at night and then to keep his promise. But it was already too late for that. It was too late. Several long, silent days later, Papyrus put the finishing touches on the massively long and arduous master report and sent the file to Alphys for printing. It was time to make the trip to new home. After weeks without it, Papyrus's armor felt more uncomfortable than ever. He shifted, tugging at plates and straps that dug into tender spots and rubbed against scrapes. Water slapped against the hull of the ferry as it slipped downstream to Hotland, where he would pick up the hard copy of the report. Then he'd have to backtrack to Waterfall to have Undine sign off on his work, after which it was onward to King Asgore. It was a lot of ground to cover in one day. It was early morning now, but Papyrus doubted he'd be home before nightfall. He wondered how much of the river person's income was paid by the royal guard. It was probably a good proportion. Hotland was, as usual, very hot. It felt even hotter inside a bunch of metal and padding, to the point where even a skeleton could start to feel overheated. No wonder Undine hated this place so much. Papyrus had always disliked how fussy traveling through this part of the underground could be. Even he had his limits when it came to puzzles, after all. But the smothering heat added a whole new dimension to his irritation at both Hotland and his armor. Thankfully, Alphys's lab was located fairly close to the ferry landing. Leaving the gently streaming river behind, Papyrus climbed the carved steps to the road. He'd never visited the royal lab before, but it was impossible to miss. A massive white building that hunched at the intersection where the roads to Waterfall and the core met. After a moment's bafflement, he figured out which button on the panel next to the door worked the intercom. While he waited for a reply, he pondered over why it was called a lab. Most canine monsters preferred New Home or Snowden over a place like Hotland, what with being covered in fur and all. Odd that any building in this region would be named after a dog. Unless he was missing something. He considered asking Alphys about it, but decided against it. Maybe he could ask Sans about it later. Oh. Or not. How long had he been standing here? His armor had him feeling like his bones were turning to charcoal in the heat. It was sapping his patience. He tried the intercom again. "Dr. Alphys?" A muzzy voice came over the speaker. "Yes?" "It's Papyrus. I've come to pick up the report I emailed to you." Papyrus frowned. "Is it a bad time? I'm not interrupting you, am I?" She may well have been doing some important science when he'd shown up to spoil her concentration. "Oh!" There was a faint scrabbling noise. "Not at all. Sorry, here, let me just unlock the door for you." With a magnetic click, the door slid open, and Papyrus walked inside the blessedly cool lab. Harsh fluorescent lighting made the pale walls and floor nearly glow, and strange machinery beeped and hissed somewhere out of sight. A terminal and enormous monitor dominated the north wall, along with a large desk that housed a computer, several small toys, mostly figures of humans in fancy dresses, and an impressive mountain range of papers, junk food packets, and dirty dishes. Alphys stood at the desk, dwarfed by the piles of junk around her. "Sorry about that," she said, rummaging through a stack of bowls. "I forgot you were stopping by today. Possibly I forgot that today was today." She gave him a wavering, buck-toothed grin. "I'm sure you've been very busy," Papyrus said, watching her sift through the mess. He didn't want her to feel bad. She was obviously a woman with better things to do than print out huge documents all day. "Well," Alphys glanced at him with a guilty twist to her lips. "I don't know if I'd say very busy." She sighed, tail twitching from side to side. "Darn it, I know I set it down right here. Sorry," she said. "It's in here somewhere." Papyrus shifted his weight from foot to foot, eager to be on his way, but not wanting to seem rude when she'd gone out of her way to do something helpful and nice for him. "Would you like me to help you look?" His hands itched with the need to do something about those dishes at the very least. "No, you don't have to do that," Alphys said. "It'll just be a second." A minor avalanche of notebooks slipped off the side of the desk. "So, how have you been?" Alphys shoved a stack of dishes out of her way. "Aside from compiling a very long report, that is." "Fine," Papyrus said. The bowls at the bottom of the stack were probably growing mold or something. He wondered where the kitchen was. Alphys paused, turning to give him a furtive once-over with her eyes. "That's good," she said. "I was just wondering, since, you're missing a tooth." Moldy noodle bowls were forgotten. "Yes, I know." The words were more clipped than Papyrus meant them to be. With the look of someone mentally kicking herself, Alphys went back to searching for the report. "Sorry." Papyrus sighed. "No, it's all right," he said. "Quite a lot of people have been pointing it out to me, that's all. It's kind of you to be concerned, but it was just a silly accident." Alphys knocked over an action figure with her elbow. "Was it a normal accident or a magic accident? I mean," she said, "if you want, I'd be happy to run some diagnostics for you. More data, never hurts, right? Her lips pulled back in what was probably meant to be a friendly smile. It made her look vaguely ill. Papyrus shook his head. It's fine. I slipped on a patch of ice, nothing exciting. Alphys stopped her search and actually glared at him. That's not very convincing, you know. Papyrus hadn't been expecting that. Admittedly, he didn't know Alphys all that well yet, but so far she'd only expressed real opinions when it came to those human cartoons she watched. Everything else she'd seemed content to go along with, a side effect of her niceness that Papyrus had been taking advantage of. That's what happened, he said, shrugging. That issue is a lot better now, anyway. I'm fine. As a scientist, it was only fitting that Alphys was really good at looking skeptical. Really? She said. What caused your condition to improve? Fidgeting under all that clinical curiosity, Papyrus made a non-committal gesture with his hands. Practice? He smiled. It sort of went away on its own. Undine was right in the first place. It wasn't a lie. Not really. Really? Undine made it sound like she'd made the wrong call before, Alphys said, rubbing her chin. She said that when she was at your house, you and your brother were being very evasive about your injuries. She frowned. It's really bothering her. And me, too. Alphys and Undine were both better friends than he deserved. Papyrus laid a hand over where his stomach would have been. Well, you don't have to worry anymore, he said. My magic is getting back to normal, like I said. With a hesitant nod, Alphys returned to her search. So you won't be hurt every time I see you from now on, right? Papyrus let out a weak chuckle. No promises. I'm a little clumsy, he said, pointing at the gap in his smile. He jumped when Alphys's tail smacked against the side of her desk. No, she muttered, tail still lashing back and forth. I know clumsy. You're not. Oh, here it is. She pulled a binder from the middle of a stack of books and paper, which promptly collapsed. Thank God. Now he could leave, before this conversation went even more wrong. Papyrus took the binder she held out to him. Only to find she wasn't letting go. Alphys? He said, giving the binder a gentle tug. Alphys's claws gripped tighter. Thank you, but I really need to go. Pushing her glasses up her snout with her free hand, Alphys took a deep breath. She took another breath, pulling herself up a little straighter. I don't have a lot of friends, she said. I'm sorry? Papyrus honestly didn't know how to properly respond to that. He stopped pulling. I'm not easy to like. Even I don't like me very much. But you're always so nice to me, Alphys said, with a shaky grin. You put up with me rambling about anime, and you'll even agree with me about stuff you probably don't care about, just to make me happy. What was this? Papyrus couldn't imagine why such a brilliant, successful person would think about herself that way. I'm not just putting up with you, he said, relaxing his hold on the binder. We're friends. I like you. I know. Alphys's shoulders slumped. I don't know why. Why you like me, I mean. Papyrus glared. Despite all of his own problems, this was simply unacceptable. Because you're great, he snapped. How dare she think otherwise? You're smart, and you're a good person. Her shoulders dipped even lower at that, for some reason. And you're always there when I need to talk, even in the middle of the night. Why wouldn't I like you? Papyrus let go of the binder entirely, and Alphys clutched it close to her chest, shielding herself. I'm not a good person, she said, eyes downcast. She tensed her hands, raking her claws over the plastic of the binder. Most people only talk to me when they need something, and I don't really blame them. But, she said, if I have Undine and you as friends, then I'll be okay. Oh, it was too early in the day to be crying. At this rate, Papyrus was going to have steam rising from his eye sockets the whole way back to the ferry landing. He cleared his throat, aware that he looked very uncool at the moment, and not just because he was missing a tooth. "If there's, anything I can do," Alphys said, looking up at him through her glasses. "Anything. Even if you just need to talk. Or—" She shifted, curling her tail around one foot. "Or if you need me to keep a secret? I'm really good at keeping secrets, even bad ones." She smiled, and it was such a sad, sad smile. He had no time to get emotional like this. Papyrus wiped at his eye sockets. "That's very kind of you. Now," he said, "I really should be on my way." He held out his hand for the binder. Instead of handing it over, Alphys set the binder down on the desk. "Papyrus," she said, "can I ask you something? I promise I won't tell anyone else." "No." That depends on the question," Papyrus found himself saying, to his disbelief. He ought to just reach out, pick up the binder, and excuse himself. That was what he ought to do. He wasn't doing it. "Don't be mad at me, please," Alphys said, her stutter worsening with her nerves. "But when you get hurt, She stopped and took several long, shaky breaths. Sweat was beading on her creased brow when she looked back up at him. "Are those all really accidents? Or is someone else doing this to you?" The instant the question was spoken, Alphys's mouth snapped shut. She stood there, breath held, waiting for an answer. Or maybe she was just waiting for him to yell at her. Papyrus held his breath too, for all the difference it made to a monster like him. The world seemed frozen in place, one endless second trailing Alphys's question. He couldn't answer that. He ought to just put up a fuss, take offense, make her regret asking and make sure she never asked again. She was so kind to him. He couldn't be selfish and put the both of them at risk. He couldn't answer. Alphys looked up at him, chewing her lip in radiating anxiety. He wanted to answer. God, everything hurt. He dried his eye sockets, his gaze darting around at the walls that felt so much closer now, despite how large and airy the room was. Papyrus snatched up her fleshy hands in his, making her flinch back. "Can I trust you?" He squeezed her hands to stop his own from trembling, searching her face for any sign of uncertainty. Her cheeks reddened under the scrutiny. "Can I trust you with this?" What was he doing? What was he doing? Alphys hesitated, seriously considering the question. The part of Papyrus's mind that was happily charging straight off a very tall cliff and dragging the rest of him along, and Alphys too, decided that that was good. She needed to be sure. "Yes," she said, nodding. She swallowed and gripped Papyrus's hands, squeezing back. "You can trust me." This was a terrible idea. This was practically a murder-suicide. But Alphys was smart, and she'd put it together on her own regardless. And he was so tired, so alone. He spoke, just above a whisper, hating himself now for how selfish and weak he was, after all this time, all this effort to keep them safe. "Ask me again." Alphys blinked several times, and without seeming to notice she was doing it, lowered her voice to match Papyrus's own. "Is someone doing this to you?" He was all alone. He was so sorry. He was so damn tired. It was instinctive now to deny, to refuse, to mislead. Papyrus took a deep breath, steadying himself, ignoring the inner voice screaming at him to stop, to do the right thing. Slowly, he nodded. Alphys gasped quietly. Pulling one hand free, she rubbed at her eyes, knocking her glasses askew. Papyrus tightened his hold on her hand. "Don't cry," he ordered. Tears already spilling down her cheeks, Alphys sniffled. "Sorry," she said, the words wheezing out from a tight chest and throat. "I'm sorry." She dabbed at the tears with the sleeve of her coat. Who? Papyrus shook his head. "I really can't tell you. Don't ever ask me that." He frowned, trying his best to project sternness. He suspected he was failing. "And don't try to find out. I'm serious, Alphys." "I don't understand." "Please," Papyrus hissed, stepping in closer, his hold on her keeping her from backing away. "I already regret this." Now that the temporary insanity was lifting, he was sickened by what he'd just done. How could he do this to her? Selfish. Stupid. "Don't tell anyone else, not anyone. Don't talk about it, even to yourself, and don't write anything down." Alphys was shivering, her eyes wide. With him standing so far inside her personal bubble, she had to crane her neck back to make eye contact. I want to help," she said, sniffling. "There must be something I can—" "You already helped me so much," Papyrus said, cutting her off. "Just by talking to me. Please believe that." He gripped her hand with both of his own. "I know I'm asking a lot, but I need you to keep this a secret. I can't tell you why. Trust me that it's vitally important. It's a matter of life and death." It truly was. And oh, why had he done this? He may have just doomed her. There was no way to take back what he'd shared. Still sniffling, Alphys nodded. She snorted a thick, goopy sound and dragged her sleeve across her snout. "I won't tell anyone," she said. "I swear." Papyrus let go of her hand, and she moved to retrieve the binder. She put it in his hands, letting him take it this time. "Thank you," he said, pushing as much sincerity into the words as he could. "You're welcome," Alphys grinned. It was still a solemn expression on her, but it looked a bit surer now. "Thank you for trusting me." One thing Hotland was good for, Papyrus mused as he left, was that no one would be able to tell he'd shed a single tear. The heat evaporated every trace of moisture in seconds, leaving his face as dry as, well, as bone.